purpose today, Miss Petrica?
Okay, today we're going to be talking about how to read for a purpose and determine what's important while we read. And since we're working on a challenge of creating a mind map that represents your understanding, we're going to be thinking about these questions so that when we make our mind map, we have these in mind. So as we read, we're going to look for these questions and answer them. So, how did exploration change society is our first question that we're going to think about.
How did roles of individuals and groups affect change and the status quo?
How did the environment affect humans?
How did access to and availability of resources affect individuals and groups?
And the last one is what influenced individual and group decisions. Okay, so I'm not sure which one we're going to focus on yet. So first of all, we need to start reading, and then we'll decide which one fits. But we need to make sure we're determining only what's important. Okay. All right, so we're going to start with this text, Into the Unknown. And we're going to flip to page 36, and there's a section called Right Around the World. Okay. So it starts out talking about searching for spice with Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan in 1492. In Marco Polo's accounts of his travels, he talked of lush islands south of the countries that he called Cathay, which was China, and Zaipangu, which is what is currently Japan, which produced many spices in great abundance, but particularly, did you have something, Mrs. Schwartz?
I have an aunt named Kathy.
Okay, but I said Cathay, and would that be a relevant connection? Would that be important enough for us to be thinking about?
No.
Okay, all right, so I'm going to go on. Okay, so I'm going to back up, which produce many spices in great abundance, particularly pepper, nutmeg, and cloves. These were the volcanic islands of Sumatra, Java, and the Moluccas, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but it's a proper noun, so we're going to go on. Or, otherwise known as the Spice Islands, where exotic plants thrive in warm, wet rainforests close to the equator. Few, if any, Europeans had ever been to them, yet they loved to use their spices in all sorts of ways, to flavor food, to make perfumes, and to preserve meat. After making the long journey from Asia to Europe along the Silk Road, spices were very expensive. In the second half of the 15th century, prices climbed even higher as Arab, Venetian traders faced huge new taxes imposed by the Ottoman Turks. In Venice, by 1500, the cost of a kilo, which is 2.2 pounds, of pepper from Sumatra had soared to 2.5 gold ducats, the price of a small house. Yes, Mrs. Schwartz?
Did that just say that the price of pepper was the same as the price of a small house?
It did say that, but I'm wondering if that's going to be important to our questions. Or is that just a really interesting fact that we like that? We like the interesting facts, but is it really going to help us understand any of our questions?
No.
All right. Not surprisingly, Europeans began to look for a way to bypass the Silk Road. If they could only find a sea route, they would be able to send their own merchants to trade directly with the Oriental ports. But first, three things needed to happen. They would have to develop seaworthy ships capable of ocean crossings. They would have to learn how to navigate away from land, and they would have to discover exactly where the fabled Spice Islands lay.
While you're reading, I'm looking back at the questions because I'm really having a hard time feeling like I'm answering any of those questions. But you just talked about needing a sea route to get their own trade started, and it talked about access to and availability of resources. And I think that that might be related to how did they have access to and availability of resources affect individuals and groups.
Okay, so I agree with you because it is all about trying to get pepper, nutmeg, and cloves, and I know that those are resources. So how did access to? So it sounded to me like Europeans did not have access to them. They weren't available to them. So what did they have to do then in order to get them? So how did that affect individuals and groups?
I think it made them have to go trade or find a trade route.
And it said, in that last little bit I read, it said, but first three things needed to happen. So it talked about three things. So the effect on individuals and groups. First they had to, they had to develop seaworthy ships. So that tells me that before that they weren't really trustworthy ships. They wouldn't want to travel long distances. They would have to learn how to navigate away from land. So it sounds like even though they were sailing, they were staying really close to the land. That probably wasn't very efficient. And they would have to discover exactly where the fabled Spice Islands lay. So fable, I know, means that it might not be true. So they don't even know the Spice Islands exist. It sounds like from reading this.
So do we think there's some things that we can keep in our purse that are important that we want to take with us?
Okay, so what would we want to put in there?
Well, I think that they had to find their own route to access the resources would be important.
Okay.
I think that they needed resources, or that maybe they wanted resources that they didn't have.
Okay.
Would be important. Those 3 things. I think when the author said, but 3 things needed to happen, that was kind of a good clue that these 3 things are probably important.
I agree, because when they give you that, these 3 things, that's a good text clue that these are probably things that are going to be important.
So they need resources to make ships. They need, suppose it's going to affect the people, they need to be able to navigate, or they need people who will navigate away from the land, because that's pretty risky. And I would think that could affect the individuals.
Yes.
And they would have to discover exactly where those lay. Not sure where that one falls. Would that one be important?
Well, it would be maybe what influenced individual and group decisions, because that would be, again, a real risky thing, and so not everybody was going to be willing to take that
Especially
risk.
if they didn't even know if it was true.
Right, so why did you risk your life for something that you didn't even know was
That one in
actually
there
true?
too.
All right.
Do you think we have enough? We really didn't answer these questions.
But I think that's okay, because in our blend space, we have multiple sources. So right now, at least we know we have information for these 2. So we have determined that there's information that's important in this text for these 2. Now I think what we need to do is go back and look at our blend space and see if we can find information for these.
That sounds like a plan.
Okay.